The last thing I did before my world fell apart was hang a picture frame. It was a Saturday morning in early October, and my wife had picked out this oversized black frame with a mat cut for 4 photos. Our engagement pictures. She'd been asking me to hang it for 3 weeks. I finally did it that morning, used a level and everything, made sure it was perfectly centered above the fireplace. She came downstairs, looked at it, smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "It's perfect." Then she left for her Bachelorette weekend. I stood there in our living room with the drill still in my hand, looking at those 4 photos of us. We looked happy. I remember thinking we were happy. I put the drill away, made myself a coffee, and sat down to watch college football. That was Saturday morning. By Sunday night, I didn't recognize my own life. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this. I was 41 years old, owned a small civil engineering firm, with a business partner I'd known since graduate school, and I was 3 weeks away from marrying a woman I'd been with for 4 years. Her name was Nina. We'd met through mutual friends at a cookout, the kind of low-key summer afternoon where nobody expects anything to happen. She laughed at something I said, something genuinely stupid, I don't even remember what, and I thought, okay, this one. 4 years later, I was hanging picture frames on a Saturday morning. Her best friend since college, I'll call her my wife's best friend because that's what she was, had organized the Bachelorette trip. 3 days in Savannah, Georgia. A group of 8 women, a rented house near Forsyth Park, restaurant reservations and bar crawls, and all the things you do on those weekends. I had no concerns about it. I trusted Nina completely. We'd talked about fidelity, about what we both needed, about what our marriage was going to look like. I thought we were on the same page. I thought we'd written the page together. Sunday evening, she called me around 7. Said they were at dinner, having a great time, she missed me. She'd be home Monday afternoon. I told her I missed her too. I was watching a documentary about infrastructure in the Pacific Northwest and eating leftover pasta. She laughed and said that was the most me thing she'd ever heard. I laughed too. She got home Monday around 3. She seemed a little off. Tired, I figured, or hungover, or just that particular kind of emotional exhaustion that comes after a few days of forced group fun. I ordered her favorite Thai food. We ate on the couch. She fell asleep before 9. I didn't know anything was wrong until Wednesday. My business partner, I'll call him my partner, texted me at 11 in the morning. He'd seen something. A mutual friend of ours had been in Savannah that weekend for a conference, and apparently he'd run into Nina's group at a bar on Saturday night. He didn't say anything to me at the time because he wasn't sure what he saw, but then he'd been talking to my partner about something unrelated, and it came up, and my partner felt like he had to tell me. He called me instead of texting after that first message. He said, "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Our friend saw Nina with a guy at that bar, like, with him. They were at a corner table and it wasn't ambiguous. I remember exactly where I was. I was standing next to the coffee machine in our office break room. The coffee machine was making that sound it always makes, that low burbling hiss, and I just stood there listening to it while my partner talked. I said, "Okay." He said, "You okay?" I said, "I don't know yet." I drove home in the middle of the workday. I don't fully remember the drive. I remember parking in the garage and sitting in the car for a few minutes, looking at the door to the house, thinking about the picture frame above the fireplace. Then I went inside. Nina was working from home that day. She had her laptop open at the kitchen table, headphones around her neck, a mug of tea going cold beside her. She looked up when I walked in and immediately knew something was wrong. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that. I sat down across from her and I said very quietly that someone had seen her in Savannah and that I needed her to tell me what happened. She went completely still. Then she started crying. Not the defensive, angry kind of crying, the other kind. The kind that's actually a confession. What came out over the next 40 minutes was this. There had been a man at the bar. She said it was just that one night. She said she'd been drinking since early afternoon, and she wasn't in her right mind. She said it didn't mean anything. She said she was so sorry. She said it would never happen again. She said she loved me. She said she was terrified of losing me. She said she would do anything. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When she was done, I said, "I need you to go stay somewhere else tonight." She asked where. I said I didn't care. Her best friend's apartment, a hotel, her mother's place, anywhere. I just needed her out of the house. She left around 6. I sat in that living room for a long time. I looked at the picture frame above the fireplace. Those 4 photos. Both of us smiling like we'd figured something out. I didn't cry. I kept waiting to cry, and it didn't come. Instead, there was this strange, spreading quiet inside me, like a room you've emptied of furniture. Not numb exactly. I was aware of everything, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of a car passing outside, the slight draft from the window in the hall. I just felt very, very still. I called my attorney the next morning. He's been my personal attorney for 8 years, handles contracts and the occasional personal matter. I told him what happened and told him I needed to know where I stood on everything. The house, which was in both our names, the joint account we'd opened for wedding expenses, the deposits we'd put down on vendors. He said he'd look into it and get back to me. Then I called We've always been close, even though he lives in Denver and I'm in Atlanta. He didn't say much, he just listened, and then he said, "Whatever you decide, I'm behind you." That was exactly the right thing to say. I hadn't decided anything yet. Nina called me 8 times that day. I let them all go to voicemail. Her texts came in waves, apologetic, then pleading, then frightened, then apologetic again. I read them all. I didn't respond. What I didn't expect was the call from her mother. Nina's mother has never particularly liked me. She's always been polite, but there was always something behind it. A particular way she'd reference Nina's ex-boyfriends, a way she'd occasionally remind me that Nina had options. I'd chalked it up to the protective instincts of a woman who'd raised her daughter alone after her husband left when Nina was 12. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I'd been giving her the benefit of the doubt for 4 years. She called me Thursday afternoon. I almost didn't pick up. I did. She didn't apologize. She didn't open with, "I'm so sorry this happened." What she said, and I'm going to quote this as precisely as I can because I've replayed it more times than I can count, was, "What happened in Savannah was a mistake, and Nina feels terrible about it. But you need to understand that a few hours of bad judgment shouldn't define a whole relationship. People make mistakes. Grown men forgive them," I said. "I appreciate you calling." She said, "She's your future wife. You made a commitment to her." I said, "She made one to me too." There was a pause. Then she said something that I still to this day cannot entirely believe came out of a human mouth. She said, "If you need to sleep with someone to feel even, then do it. Get it out of your system. But don't throw away everything you've built over one night." I held the phone away from my face and looked at it for a second. Then I said, "I'll be in touch." And I hung up. I sat with that for a while. The suggestion that what I was feeling, the betrayal, the disorientation, the grief, could be resolved by me going and doing the same thing, as though the problem was some kind of ledger that needed balancing. As though what I actually wanted was permission to cheat, and I'd just been waiting for someone to grant it. What I wanted was a wife who hadn't. I called my attorney back and told him to start drafting a formal termination of the engagement. We weren't legally married, so there was no divorce process, but there were shared financial instruments, a joint account, vendor contracts, a deposit on a venue. He said he'd handle it. Then I called the venue, the caterer, the florist, and the photographer. I told each of them that the wedding was canceled and asked about our cancellation policy. The venue kept 70% of the deposit. The caterer was more reasonable. The florist was actually kind about it. The photographer, who I'd booked based on Nina's recommendation, and who turned out to be a close friend of hers, said the deposit was non-refundable under any circumstances and hung up on me. That felt about right. I notified my family. My brother already knew. My parents took it quietly, the way they take most things. My mother said she was sorry. My father said he was proud of how I was handling it. I'd sent a single group text to our mutual friends circle, something brief and factual. The wedding was off. I wasn't going to go into detail. I appreciated their understanding. Nina's best friend called me. I picked up because I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting what I got, which was genuine remorse. She said she'd been there that night. She said she'd tried to intervene and couldn't. She said she'd told Nina when it was happening that she was making a catastrophic mistake. She was crying on the phone. I believed her. I thanked her and told her I didn't hold her responsible. Nina herself I finally talked to on Friday. She came to the house. I'd told her she could pick up some of her things, and she sat across from me in the same kitchen where I'd sat across from her on Wednesday, and she talked. She'd written things down, I could tell. She made the case for our relationship. She talked about what we had, about how much she loved me, about how she'd been terrified leading up to the wedding, and made a terrible decision, and she knew that wasn't an excuse, but it was the truth. She asked me to consider counseling. She asked me to consider postponing rather than canceling. She asked me to at least take more time. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I believe that you love me. I believe you're sorry. I believe this was the worst decision you've ever made, and that you'd undo it if you could. But I can't marry someone who did this 3 weeks before our wedding. I just can't. And I don't think you'd want me to try and build a marriage on top of this, because it would never hold." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because I know what I'd be thinking every time you went somewhere without me. And that's not a marriage. That's just a different kind of suffering." She cried for a long time. I sat there. When she stopped, she nodded slowly, like she'd actually heard me, and she got up and got her things and left. I took the picture frame down off the wall that night. I didn't throw it away. I just put it in the garage. What I didn't anticipate was the lawsuit. About 2 weeks after the engagement ended, I received a letter from an attorney. Nina was suing me for emotional distress and for the losses she'd incurred as a result of the engagement being terminated. Specifically, non-refundable deposits she'd paid independently on a dress, on spa services, on her half of the honeymoon hotel. I stared at that letter for a very long time. I called my attorney. He was quiet for a moment when I told him, and then he said, in the measured way he has, well, okay, let's talk about what this actually means. What it actually meant was not much. The claim was thin. Emotional distress from a broken engagement is notoriously difficult to argue, especially when the cause of the breakup is the plaintiff's own admitted conduct. The honeymoon hotel she'd booked on a credit card that was solely in her name. The dress was non-refundable, but that wasn't my decision. My attorney said he could handle a motion to dismiss, and in the meantime he'd be filing a counterclaim for my losses. The venue deposit, the catering deposit, the rehearsal dinner I'd already paid for in full. He also pointed out, and this is the part I hadn't thought about, that her attorney had sent this correspondence to my home address, which Nina no longer had authorization to access or share, and which I had asked her in writing not to distribute. That was a small thing, but it was the beginning of what became a pattern. Nina started reaching out again after the lawsuit was filed. Texts at odd hours, voicemails that started calm and turned scattered. One night she called 7 times between 11 p.m. and 1 in the morning. I didn't answer any of them. I screenshot every message and sent them to my attorney. Her mother called again. This time I didn't pick up. The thing that people don't tell you about a broken engagement, at least not in my experience, is that it exists in this strange legal and social in-between. You're not divorced. There's no court date, no judge, no formal process dissolving anything. You just stop. You untangle yourselves from deposits and accounts, social media, and you stop. But the other person doesn't always stop at the same time you do, and that asymmetry is its own kind of problem. About a month after everything ended, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it because I was in a period of just answering things, trying to stay on top of whatever might be coming. It was a man's voice. He identified himself as someone connected to Nina's lawsuit, not her attorney, something vague and off-script, and said he wanted to meet in person to discuss resolving things without going to court. I told him to contact my attorney and hung up. I told my attorney. He said, do not engage with anyone from her side outside of proper legal channels. Forward me anything you receive. I did. There was one night about 6 weeks in when things got strange in a way I wasn't prepared for. I'd gone for a walk. I'd been walking a lot, mostly at night, just to get out of the house and move. There's a park near my neighborhood with a small footbridge over a creek. I walked that path probably 3 times a week. That night, when I got to the bridge, Nina was there. I don't know how she knew that route. We'd walked it together a few times, I suppose. She was standing at the railing, looking down at the water. When she heard my footsteps, she turned around. She looked terrible, not in a disheveled, made-for-effect way, in the genuine way that someone looks when they haven't been sleeping and have been crying more than not. I felt something move in me when I saw her. Not love, not pity exactly. Something older than those things. Concern, maybe. The residue of having cared about someone for 4 years. She said she just wanted to talk. I said I didn't think that was a good idea given the legal situation. She started crying. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this far. She said the lawsuit was her mother's idea. She said she wanted to drop it, but she'd signed things, and she didn't know how to undo it. She said she was so tired. And then she said something that scared me. She said she didn't know what the point of anything was anymore. She said it in that flat, exhausted way that doesn't sound like a threat but sits very differently than ordinary sadness. I said, Nina, are you okay? Do I need to call someone? She said she was fine. She said she was just tired. I said, I'm going to call your best friend right now and ask her to come be with you. Is that okay? She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She looked at the water. I stepped away and called Nina's best friend. I told her where we were and what Nina had said and that I was worried. She said she'd be there in 15 minutes. I stayed on the bridge, not close to Nina but not walking away either, until I heard her friend calling Nina's name from across the park. Nina went toward her voice. Her friend looked at me over Nina's shoulder and mouthed thank you. I walked home. I called my attorney the next morning and told him what had happened. He said I'd done the right thing and made a note of it. He suggested I reach out to document the encounter in writing. 3 weeks after that, we were in a preliminary hearing on the counterclaim. Nina's attorney presented her case. My attorney presented mine. The judge looked at the material, the admitted conduct, the timeline, the financial record, and said he was inclined to dismiss the emotional distress claim and allow the counterclaim to proceed. Nina's attorney requested a continuance. The judge granted 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I got a call from my attorney. Nina's side had reached out about settlement. They were willing to drop the lawsuit entirely if I dropped the counterclaim. I thought about it for exactly one afternoon. Then I said no. My counterclaim was for the venue deposit, the rehearsal dinner, and the catering deposit. It wasn't a large sum in the scheme of things, but it was the sum of money I had spent planning a wedding with someone who was with another man 3 weeks before that wedding, and I was not interested in calling it even. We went back to court. It went the way my attorney had predicted. The emotional distress claim was dismissed. The counterclaim was upheld. Nina's side was ordered to pay a portion of my documented losses, minus what the court determined were shared cancellation costs. Her mother's name was not on the lawsuit, but she had apparently been the one directing a significant portion of the strategy, which explained a great deal. I walked out of that courthouse on a November afternoon, leaves coming down off the trees along the street, and I stood on the sidewalk for a minute. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that. There was no surge of vindication, no sense of justice finally delivered. Mostly what I felt was tired, and underneath the tired, something that took me a while to identify. It was relief. Not relief that it was over, though it was over, and that was something. Relief that I had trusted what I knew, that I hadn't let her mother's logic get into my head, that I hadn't stood at that kitchen table and done the math on 4 years, and decided the math outweighed what I actually knew to be true. I had known, in some deep and non-negotiable place, that I couldn't marry someone after that, and I had acted on that knowledge, and the world had not ended. The world had actually gotten quieter and calmer, and in some ways I hadn't anticipated. Better. My business partner took me out for a burger that night. Nothing fancy, just the place we used to go after late nights at the office when we were first starting out, before either of us had real money. We ate and talked about work, and he didn't bring up Nina once. I appreciated that more than I could say. I took some time off around the holidays, went to Denver and stayed with my brother for 10 days. His wife made too much food and his kids climbed on me and exhausted me, and I was grateful for every minute of it. I went for long runs in the cold. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time in months. I read 3 books I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. Somewhere in there, I started to feel like myself again. Not the self I was before Nina. I don't think you go back, not exactly, but a version of myself I recognized. Steady. Clear. I got back to Atlanta in January and I took the picture frames out of the garage. I put our engagement photos in a box and put the box in storage. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to look at them every day. I rehung the frame above the fireplace with a landscape photograph I'd taken years ago on a road trip through Utah. It fit the space well. The woman I would eventually meet, and I'm not going to call this a love story because it's too soon for that and I'm too old to rush it, came into my life sideways the way those things do. A structural engineer who contracts occasionally with my firm, someone I'd exchanged exactly 4 emails with over 2 years and never thought about beyond the professional context. She came to a project review meeting in February and said something sharp and funny in response to something a client said, and I thought, without meaning to, oh, we've had dinner twice. She doesn't know any of this story yet. Maybe she will someday. What I know now, and didn't know a year ago, is that the worst thing that happened to me also clarified something I'd been soft on for a long time. The question of what I actually needed versus what I was willing to settle for in order to keep something intact. For 4 years I'd been happy, genuinely happy, and I'd built something real, and then I found out that it had a crack running through the foundation that I hadn't been allowed to see. And when I found it, I had a choice. Build on top of the crack, or don't build there. I didn't build there. Some days I still think about what the house might have looked like. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. 4 years is a long time. Nina wasn't a bad person. She made a terrible choice, and her mother made it worse. And all of it together became something I couldn't move through. But I don't carry it as bitterness. I just carry it as information. That picture frame is still in the garage, not because I'm holding on to anything, just because I haven't needed the space yet. When I do, I'll know what to do with it.